This is the second lesson. So today we're going to talk about the Durrani dynasty and the British influence. So that goes from basically 1700 to 1931. And I thought we were going to do that all in one lesson, but we'll see how far we get. I don't think we're going to get all that done. But we're definitely going to talk about the, get started on it anyway. So this is kind of the take-home points from last time. We just did last time we just did a brief overview of the medieval history of Afghanistan, basically from Alexander the Great up until around 1700. And kind of the take-home points from that, just general patterns that we see, is that the region of Afghanistan is repeatedly overrun by regional powers, namely Indian powers, Persian powers, and Russian powers, essentially. Those are kind of the big three in that area that surround it. They're very ethnically and culturally diverse. Lots of different ethnic groups. Pretty much only held together by Islam. That's about the only thing that the people in Afghanistan have in common between all the various regions. It's historically not been thought of as a single country or even a single region. The big mountain range down the center, the Hindu Kush, kind of divides it into various sections, and a lot of times various powers controlled different sections, and nobody really thought about it as, in order to conquer that area, we have to conquer the whole of modern Afghanistan. It's just not how it was thought of. Most conquerors exacted tribute from major cities, but few tried to administrate or control the local populations. And the geography of that is the reason for it. It's just not, there never was a good way to control the local decentralized family groups. So basically the conquerors just came through, they would exact tribute from a city, and then if those guys wanted to go out into the countryside and get the money, that was up to them. But that was always very difficult. So just to remind ourselves, that is Afghanistan right there. You can see Pakistan and India to the east. In the times we're going to be talking about today, there was no Pakistan. That was all considered to be India there. You have Iran, ancient Persia to the west, and then the Russian and the Russian-influenced peoples to the north. Those states, again, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, they only came about since the Soviet Empire's demise, so they're very new features on the map. This again is the geography, topographical map. Main mountain range here, just to review, is the Hindu Kush Mountains. Very important to keep that in mind, right down the middle of the country. And that kind of divides the country into four different regions. You have north, east, right here, that's the capital, Kabul. The southern regions, and then the western regions. All kept fairly separate and distinct by that mountain range. This is the political map. And actually I forgot. I printed these out so that you can keep track, because I'm going to talk about these cities, and since you've never heard of them, probably most of them before, it can be really hard to remember where they are in the country. So you can kind of follow along with this. Might make it easier. Anyone else? So the four main cities that you want to remember are Kabul, modern-day capital, Kandahar in the south, Herat in the west, and Mazar-e-Sharif in the north. Also, we're going to talk some about Peshawar, which is in modern Afghanistan, or modern Pakistan, but historically was often controlled by the same people as Kabul. Right, they are. Good point. This is Peshawar here, Kabul here. This is the Khyber Pass through this mountain range. Also, just remember the two major rivers in the region are the Indus River right here, and the Amu Darya River up here. So you have the mountain range in the middle, and then you got the regions between the mountain range and those two rivers, kind of. You got the Khyber Pass here. There's a secondary mountain range that goes along here, along the modern-day border. And you got the Khyber Pass and the Kajaki Pass down here. So the reason why Kandahar and Kabul are so prominent is they're at the two places that you can go through that mountain range. So those are the two main trade routes. Last time we left off with this guy, Ahmad Shah Durrani. He's called the father of modern Afghanistan. He's often lauded as the guy to unite the tribes of Afghanistan and kind of meld them into a single people. That's a bit of a myth, as we're going to see, but that's the mythology surrounding Ahmad Shah. In order to understand him, we've got to back up a little bit. So the last empire that we talked about last time was the Mughal Empire. And that was a Muslim Indian dynasty. So they were centered in Delhi, modern capital of India, I believe, right? But their influence extended into Afghanistan more or less from the 1600s into the early 1700s. So you can see Kabul was definitely in their influence. Sometimes Kandahar, depending on how powerful they were at any given time. Now, over this time period, we've got a couple of other powers that are coming into play. In the early 1600s, you started having the British making settlements along the coastline. But they were kind of kept at bay by the Mughals. The Mughals were very powerful at this point, and they let them do trading posts, but they did not, let them come into the interior very much. And then to the west, in modern-day Iran, and kind of controlling the other side of Afghanistan, you had the Safavid Empire. So that's the stage here in about the early 1700s, where we're going to pick up here. That brings us to this guy, Nadir Shah. He is a Persian or Safavid king. Nadir Shah captures Kandahar in 1738. So there was kind of, over the 1600s, there was back and forth between the Mughals and the Safavids. They traded ground in Afghanistan, but nobody really was dominant. That all changed with Nadir Shah. In 1738, he comes through with a very large army. Well, not really large, but he's an extremely good commander. Some people rank him on the level of Napoleon and Hannibal and commanders like that. He's not well known, but extremely good commander. He sweeps through, captures Kandahar. Just to give you an idea of the time frame this is, George Washington was born in 1732. So while our colonies are getting ready to declare their independence on over here, this is what's going on in Afghanistan, contemporary. So he heads north to Kabul next, and Kabul is definitely under Mughal control at this time. He smashes through there, goes right through the Khyber Pass, invades the Mughals into India, and goes all the way to Delhi. He crushes the Mughal armies. One particular battle, he was outnumbered 6-1, and completely destroyed the Mughal power. The Mughals never ever recovered from those losses. So back to the map here. He comes from over here in Iran, smashes all the way through here, up to Kabul, through the Khyber Pass, over into India, all the way into Delhi, which is over here. But then when he leaves, he sets up territories basically in modern-day Pakistan. This whole region here basically was now paying him tribute, is how it worked. But they were considered Persian domains. Then he left, went north, and ended up back in Persia.
All Muslims still.
All Muslim. These are the Mughals and the Persians, the Safavids. They're all Islamic dynasties. So that brings us, that's kind of the background to, actually I need to talk about this. The Koh-i-Noor Diamond. The Mughals had this diamond. So the diamond is right there. This is the British crown jewel now. So we're going to talk about how the British ended up with it. But when Nadir Shah came into India, this jewel was the centerpiece of what was called the Peacock Throne, which was the the symbol of Mughal power. So he captures Delhi, takes this jewel with him. He takes it out of the throne and makes a sash for on his arm, and so he wears that as a symbol of, Persian dominance. So he takes it back to Iran. That brings us to Ahmad Shah. So I think 1738, this is happening. Ahmad Shah is a teenager. Nadir Shah picks up this teenager on his way through Afghanistan. And I'm going to get more to that in a minute. But to understand Ahmad Shah, we have to take a little bit of a look at Pushtoon culture. So Ahmad Shah is a Pushtoon. This whole area here, these tan peoples, this ethnic group is called the Pushtuns. All the way from Kabul over to the Indus River and then over all the way to Herat, definitely Kandahar, all is Pushtun country. So basically Nadir Shah's campaign trail went right through the middle of them. So Pushtuns are basically their culture is a family-based culture. So your loyalty kind of is with your family and then your extended family and out and so on from there. They don't have, at least at this time, did not have a very nationalistic identity. It was just a disorganized group of tribes. Talk about that in a second. Here's some Pushtoon Proverbs that might kind of give you an idea of how they think about things. So they say, better is a strong dog in the yard than a strong king in the capital. They were not relying on kings to protect them. And then, it's me against my brothers, it's me and my brothers against my cousins, and it's we and our cousins against the invader. So basically what that means is if you have an invader, everybody unites against the invader. When the invader leaves, we all go back to killing each other. So here's Ahmad Shah is a Sadozai down here. But you got the Pushtuns is the ethnic group, and then you've got various clans you've got clans and then you've got kind of bigger confederations or associations of clans. Very loose, like they don't have governing power, but what it basically means is if you're an Abduli versus a Ghilzai, if there's a war, you're going to side with the Abdulis against the Ghilzais. Not that you like the other Abdulis necessarily, but you like the Ghilzais less than you hate the Ghilzais more than you hate the other Abdulis, so that's kind of how it works. These are not like governing associations, they're just kind of, this is how your loyalties lie. So Ahmad Shah is an Abduli. At this time, the Ghilzais kind of control the Kandahar area. The Abdulis kind of are centered more around Herat. Okay, so then you have, within the Abdulis, two powerful clans are the Sadozais and the Barakzais. Now the Zai thing on the end there, you'll notice they got a bunch of Zais. That basically means son of, or descendant of. So the Sadozais are descended from a guy named Sado. The Barakzais are descended from a guy named Barak. So these are now extended family groups that we're talking about. So these two groups are kind of the most powerful ones in the Abdulis, and they're always fighting each other, trying to control Herat, basically. And the Durranis is another name that came to be used for the Sadozais. So go ahead.
On your map of the ethnics, wasn't Herat outside of the Pushtun?
They put it outside now.
Okay.
This is a modern ethnic map.
Oh, okay.
At this time, it was definitely this whole area, and you can see there's plenty of splotches there, but it was definitely under Pushtun control. So these guys, the Sadozais and the Barakzais, were constantly trading back and forth about who controlled Herat. The way it worked was the Sadozais tended to be more favorable toward the Persians, who were always also trying to control Herat. So they acted kind of as Persian puppets. So they would get their support and military arms and stuff from the Persians to help defeat the Barakzais. Now the Ghilzais in Kandahar are always very concerned about the Persians. So they don't want the Persians having influence over Herat, so they tend to back the Barakzais and supply them with arms. Not that they're friends, but that's just good politics. So when Ahmad Shah's mother is pregnant with him, there's a change of power in Herat, and the Sadozais get kicked out by the Barakzais. His mother's almost killed in the process. She barely escapes with her life. A few years later, after he's born, he's a young child. He comes back to Herat when the Sadozais take power. Then a few years after that, they get kicked out again. He had a pretty exciting childhood, is the basic point. The last time, when he was about 7, he got kicked out. Him and his uncle made their way to Kandahar, where they tried to get asylum. Turned out the Ghilzais, remember, they don't like the Sadozais, so they threw him into prison. So he spent from about 7 to 14 in prison, just because he was a Sadozai. That all changed when, remember, Nadir Shah, the Persian king, comes through. The Sadozais are kind of on his side, in a sense. When he comes through and captures Kandahar, he releases Ahmad Shah and makes him part of his army. And so he accompanies then Nadir Shah on his campaigns. He must have been a pretty responsible young man, because very quickly he was put in charge of the Afghan levy. So he's still a teenager at this point, but Nadir Shah conscripts men from the Pushtoon tribes and makes them part of his army. Nadir Shah puts Ahmad Shah in charge of those. So he's now in charge of about 3,000 or 4,000 horsemen, and proved extremely effective. They were some of the most effective parts of Nadir Shah's army. Okay, so then they go through India. Ahmad Shah is there. They go back to modern-day Iran. By this time, there's plenty of revolts over there that they got to put down. So they head back, and then we get to 1741, and Nadir Shah is assassinated. Now he is in the years leading up to this, he's very concerned about being assassinated, because there's plenty of members of his family that want to that have quarrels with him and so forth. So actually, in the times leading up to his assassination, he didn't trust his Persian army. So he actually made his non-Persian levies his bodyguards. So Ahmad Shah became Nadir Shah's a big part of his bodyguard and one of his most trusted generals. Okay, 1741, Nadir Shah catches on to this coup, or this assassination, a little bit before it happens, the night before. So he has a meeting with his most trusted generals, and they concoct a plan that in the morning, the Afghans and the other foreign levies are going to attack the rest of the Persian army, wipe them out, and that's how they're going to deal with this problem. Somebody leaked that information from the meeting to the Persians, and so they had a meeting, an emergency meeting, and decided not to wait till morning and to go ahead with the plan in the night. So a few hours later, they storm the Nadir Shah's tent, kill him, and then, of course, all chaos breaks loose in the camp. Everybody's fighting everybody. Ahmad Shah keeps his head, and him and some of his guys break through. They fight their way through to the king's tent. He goes in and takes the king's signet ring and that Koh-i-Noor Diamond that he's wearing, and makes off with them. So some historians speculate that he might have been the one who leaked it in the first place, since he's the one who benefited. Nobody knows, but you can only speculate. So as soon as he's got that taken care of, remember he's over here in Iran, he makes off with his cavalry regiments for Kandahar. Of course, everything is crumbling in Persia now. They're having a civil war about who's going to be the next king. So what you got is a power vacuum right in here. The Mughals are still reeling from their defeat from Nadir Shah, and the Persians are in no position to reassert their authority over the region because they're busy fighting each other. He seizes the opportunity to declare himself king in Kandahar. But he's got about 6,000 horsemen at this point, but he's not powerful enough, to just control by force. So he has to make some deals with the local chieftains that are the most powerful factions. He has a bit of streak of luck, because remember, all this area over here is paying tribute to Nadir Shah. So just at the moment when he's arriving in Kandahar to declare himself king, there's a caravan of tribute money coming down and arrives at Kandahar at the same time. All the money from over here. Ahmad Shah makes a deal with the governor who's in charge of that caravan. They split the money, and the governor goes back over here, and he keeps this whole treasure trove. And that's one of the ways he's able to buy off his opponents. And so he was somewhat of a shrewd politician. But it also turned out he was a military genius as well. So remember, he had all those experience. He had experience with one of the greatest military minds of his time. So basically, he cobbled together an uneasy alliance of tribes. But you know what kings do when they have troubles at home is one of the best things you can do is start a war. So no sooner was he king than he heads off with his army to attack India. It was good business. There was not any great powers there at the time, so it was easy pickings, good revenue source. He's king about 25 years. Over the next 25 years, he fights 9 campaigns in India. I think 3 campaigns above the Hindu Kush and another couple in Kandahar. Very successful general. He ends up, by the end of his lifetime, basically this whole area, Afghanistan and northern Pakistan, are under his control. But it's a bit of a... It's not very accurate to say that he united the Pushtoon tribes, because every time he would come back through, from one campaign to another, he pretty much had to put down somebody's revolt in either Kandahar or Herat or Kabul somewhere. The stories, it just never ends when you read it, as we're going to see. So that's why I say an uneasy alliance. It was pretty much because of his domination and military prowess that the whole thing held together. But he established a pretty substantial empire. He died of a wound, got infected, and he died in 1772. And he appoints this guy, Timur Shah Durrani, is his son, as his successor. So he reigns from 1772 to 1793. So he has about a 20-year reign, but things immediately start to disintegrate. This guy is not the military mind that his father was. He has much more difficulty putting down revolts, and he has a lot of difficulty holding on to his Indian domains. So by this time remember the Mughals are kind of done. So you've got another power that's rising in India, or 2 other powers. One is the British in the south. In the north, you've got the Sikhs. And we talked about the Sikhs a little last week. And they're a religious, it's a religion, but it also had a political manifestation in what's called the Sikh Empire. And so the Sikhs are not Muslim. And they're not Hindus. They're a sort of a mystic religion, but they started taking over those old Mughal domains in northern India. And eventually they started chipping away at Timur Shah's Durrani domains, but he just wasn't able to hang on to them. And when he died, 1793, he appointed his son, Zaman Durrani. So he's a son of Timur. He reigned from 93 to 1881. And things just continued to disintegrate. And there's so many, when you read these stories of these guys, they're putting down annual tribal revolts, pretty much. Like every time there's an opportunity, somebody's revolting. And the intrigue, even within the Durrani family, is unbelievable. So in 1801, one of his half-brothers, Shah Mahmud Durrani, makes a revolt, and they have a battle, and Zaman is defeated. So Zaman, in this battle, realizes all is lost, so he heads up into the mountains and puts himself in the care of a chieftain up there who he thinks is loyal. Turns out the chieftain sees the changing of the tides, and he decides to hold him until Mahmud gets there. So he realizes, Zaman realizes what's probably going to happen to him. So he takes that, remember he's got that diamond, the Koh-i-noor Diamond. He hides it in a wall in where he's getting kept. So when Mahmud shows up, he can't find it. He ends up putting out Zaman's eyes and taking him off to Kabul to hold. Well, Mahmud only lasts about 3 years, you can see, till Zaman's full brother, Mahmud's half-brother, does a revolt. And so he puts Mahmud into prison and takes Zaman out. It's unclear how this guy, Shah Shuja Durrani is his name. It's unclear how he found the diamond, but maybe Zaman told him where it was, but nobody knows. But anyway, he got back a hold of it and reinstated it as a symbol of his power. So he lasts about 6 years. And again, the intrigues, the collapse of the Durrani family, it's just this is the third generation now. You so often see that happen in the third generation. Things just fall apart and totally dysfunctional. So, etc. This goes on. Actually, after Shuja, after 1809, Mahmud, who got out of prison, comes back and kicks him out. It's just unbelievable. So when Shuja is defeated, he makes good his escape. He goes through the Khyber Pass, taking the diamond with him, and heads to the Sikhs. Now, he had some sort of plan where he was going to exchange the diamond with the Sikhs for safe passage or for safe conduct. Well, it turned out when he got there, the Sikhs just took the diamond and threw him into prison. So it didn't really work out. A few years later, he tunneled out of prison and into the sewers, got out, and headed down to south to the British. And the British said, hey, this is a former Afghan monarch. We're going to keep him on hand in case we need him later. So they gave him a salary, and so he lived comfortably back there, plotting how he could take back his throne. Anyway, etc., etc., etc. The Durranis pretty much killed and blinded themselves out of power. By this time, they had lost pretty much all of their Indian domains all the way to the Khyber Pass. They actually lost most of their southern domains. Their capital was Kabul. They lost Kandahar and Herat. So by the time this guy seizes power, pretty much all they've got left is Kabul and a few regions around it. This guy here is named Dost Mohammad Kahn. Now notice, he's a Barakzai and the first of the Mohammedzai dynasty. So remember, the Sadozais and the Barakzais are enemies here. So we've had Durrani or Sadozai leadership for the last 40, 50 years. Now the Barakzais, with their decline, the Barakzais managed to seize power. And notice too, this is just an interesting point. So his descendants are called the Mohammedzais. Notice his name is Dost Mohammad. That's how these names work. So he's the first of the Mohammedzai dynasty. So you notice here, he reigned from 1826 to 39, and then again from 45 to 63. What happened in the middle there is what we're going to talk about next. That was the first Anglo-Afghan War. So, before we talk about that, we need to go back a little bit and talk about the East India Company. So that's the British influence in India at this time. So they began trading about the 1600s, but were originally limited to the coastal regions by the powerful Mughals. Well, when Ahmad Shah and Nadir Shah crushed the Mughal Empire, they were able to start to move inland, and because there was a power vacuum there. And they became extremely powerful. By the 1800s, they had an army of over 200,000 men in India, just a standing army privately owned by the company to promote their interests. And they accounted for about half of global commerce. So half of international trade was done through the East India Company. It's an unbelievable, No, they were, so what happened then is about in the 1850s, the British government decided that India was too important and too big of a strategic thing to be controlled by a private company. So the East India Company was rolled into the British government, essentially. It had always been, so it was always kind of a proxy of the British government. Like most of the people that were on the board of directors or whatever they called it were also parliamentarians. And so they went together, but it was technically private and was owned by shareholders. But eventually the British government said, we cannot afford for a private company to mess this up. So we are going to roll that in. and manage it ourselves. So then they managed it for another 100 years or so until it was finally became independent. So that's the East India Company. What do they want? They're in southern India. Yeah.
The French actually have colonized India first, so we went too far south.
Well, the French and the Portuguese were also there originally.
Okay.
The East India Company fought some wars with the French and the Portuguese and kicked them out. So there's a lot of very interesting history there that goes right along with all the European conflicts that happened. But eventually the East India Company became the power of India. Okay, what do they want? They want trade. They were supporting their trade interests. So they want stability in India. And so the main powers to their north side at this point are the Sikhs and this Dost Mohammad Kahn, the Afghan ruler. Now those guys are of course not friends. They are, so their border is essentially right here, except the Afghans claim that all those domains are still theirs and they were taken. The Sikhs say that, basically every time the Afghans attack, we are being attacked without cause. It's just, they were constantly fighting. The Peshawar, which is right on the other side of the Khyber Pass, was the historic Afghan winter capital. So they really wanted that, and so there was a lot of fighting, and that's not good for business. Remember, this is like one of the main trade routes going right through the Khyber Pass, and you've got warring. So the East India Company doesn't like that. Also, this Dost Mohammad Khan, he needs funds. He's got a very weak hold on power on all these dysfunctional tribes, and he needs outside funds and outside help to take back his domains in Peshawar. So he would really like to have the British as his ally against the Sikhs. The problem is the British really aren't that interested in funding him to attack, someone else who's on their northern frontier. It just doesn't make business sense for them to be facilitating a war on their northern border. So Dost Mohammad decides, okay, he gets this idea. Well, not really his idea. At that time, some Russian guys show up in his capital, and they claim to be diplomats from Russia, from the Tsar. Now, at this point, Britain and Russia are in a trade war, and Britain's worst nightmare is for a Russian army to come down through Afghanistan. Remember, they can't go through the Himalayas. They have to come down around the Hindu Kush and then through the Khyber Pass. Their worst nightmare is for that to happen and the Russians to show up in India and disrupt their commerce. So, Dost Mohammad says, hey, these guys, I will start talking to them, and then the British will say, we need to talk to this guy. Like, if we're not careful, he's going to make an alliance with the Russians. Now, it turns out, we're pretty sure these Russian guys were just like freelance diplomats that were trying to make a deal so they could go back to the Tsar and say, hey, we got this deal, do you want it? They don't seem to have been from the Tsar at all. But the British didn't know that. So they get very, very concerned that there's about to be a military alliance between Dost Mohammad and the Russians. And Dost Mohammad makes no secret of this. He wants the British to know that. The British are looking at this now and saying, okay, we've got this Dost Mohammad guy. He's fighting the Sikhs. That's not good for us. He's dealing with the Russians. That's not good for us. We've got this other guy, Shuja, remember, who came down to live in and is now on their payroll. He was an Afghan ruler. He's friendly to us. Why don't we just make him king, and that'll solve our whole problem? So that's what they decided to do. So they came up with this Tripartite Treaty between Shuja, the Sikhs, and the British, or the East India Company. So Shuja agreed to relinquish all claims to any land beyond the Khyber Pass if he was made king, thus solving the Afghan-Sikh conflict. They thought that would solve it. Now, of course, the Afghan tribes still think that that's theirs, so, but the British somewhat naively thought that this treaty would solve the problem. Also, Shuja agreed to give the British control of his foreign policy, thus creating a British-friendly buffer state there. So basically, the British then promised to stay out of Shuja's domestic affairs and protect him against any foreign incursion. So that put him on the throne. If he forwards basically anyone who comes to him and say, I want to make an alliance with you, he has to send them to the British and say, these guys handle my foreign policy. So the British, to them, this seemed like a good solution. They got a British-friendly buffer state. They make peace with the Sikhs, so trade can continue, and they don't have to rule. They don't have to try to administer Afghanistan themselves because this Shuja guy is going to do that for them. So that brings us to the first Anglo-Afghan War. So two armies, the British send two armies, one through the Kajaki Pass, one through the Khyber Pass. They converge on Kabul and oust Dost Mohammad. They set up Shuja. It's a very well-executed military campaign. Very little opposition. The British are, at this point, the best military in the world. The Afghans are one of the worst militaries in the world. So they roll right over them, and everything is going well. And they seem to have solved the problem. And that's where we're going to, I guess, stop today. We're going to pick up with the aftermath of this war, or so we say part 2 of the war, next time. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what the politics that are going on in this region are at this time. You've got the British, the Sikhs, and the Afghans, and this is the solution.
I take it that the East India Company was pretty much agnostic as far as religion goes. Their religion was trade, or to take care of Christianity in this region.
Excuse me. Their interests were commercial, so as far as I can tell, they did not make an attempt to. I believe there was an agreement when, and I have to look more into this, but some authors that I've read say that in the Second Anglo-Afghan War, which we'll talk about next week, there was an agreement between the Shah of Afghanistan and the British that there would be allowed to be foreign missionaries in the country. But as we'll see, that arrangement really didn't last very long. So as far as I can tell, the British didn't really make a huge evangelistic effort.
Next question. You mentioned the Peacock Throne. I thought that was a Persian-Iranian thing. Did it start in...
According to my research, it's a Mughal thing.
Because the Shah of Iran, the one that we installed, the United States installed in the 50s or 60s, sat on the Peacock Throne.
Is that right?
In Iran.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, according to my research, I was under the impression that he didn't, or that I haven't heard that he took the Peacock Throne with him. But it's possible that he did, or that they made a similar one. I don't know. But I do know that it was definitely originally a Mughal Indian throne. And maybe it's a different Peacock Throne, I don't know. But he would have had the opportunity to take it, so maybe he did, and maybe it was preserved, I don't know.
Yeah, this is many
Yeah.
later. And the Koh-i-Noor Diamond is
Oh, yes.
to be continued.
Well, so that's kind of where it passes out of Afghan history and becomes part of Indian history. A number of years later, the British and the Sikhs had a war of their own, and the British took control of that area. When they did that, they made a treaty with they imposed a treaty, I should say, on the Sikhs, and part of that was them releasing the Koh-i-Noor Diamond to the British. It was taken back to England, recut, and is now set in the British crown as one of the crown jewels. But to give you an idea, this diamond is huge. It's in its current cut, it's 106 carats. Now, like if you go to buy a diamond ring at a jewelry store, 1 carat is a decent sized ring. 2 carats, 3 carats is a very large ring and gets extremely expensive. This is 106, okay? In its original cuts, it would have been even larger. Every time you recut it, you take a little bit off. So it's the 9th largest one in the world, I understand. Go ahead. I am, yeah.
Here it says the Persians captured the throne in
Okay.
1739.
Yep. So that would have been during Nadir Shah's campaign. So I had not read about that,
That's the Britannic saying that.
but apparently that's the case, that they took that, the whole thing. I wasn't sure if they had just taken the jewels or if they took the whole thing, but yeah.
I did a search.
Yeah. Well, it's probably true. Probably. Go ahead.
Yeah, just an example of, for me, again, Christ and what Christianity does. Without them, it's just wars all the time. Just,
Yeah.
just-
In my study of the history of Afghanistan, so far, I think I have come across maybe 2 peaceful transitions of power. Since Ahmad Shah to the present, so uncontested. Generally, what happens is the king names his successor, and then all the other tribes revolt, test the waters, see if this guy can hang on to power. If he does, then they will wait till the next opportunity. But it's unbelievable.
So that tribal thing of I fight with my brothers and I fight my cousins, and we all fight invaders, that still pertains. That's still.
I think so. The family, in recent years, the family groups have been disrupted somewhat by all the wars. So perhaps they've lost some of it, but they still have the Proverbs. They still think about it that way.
How about the dog? Oh, Muslims didn't like dogs.
What about the dog?
The
Strong dog.
Yeah.
Strong dog in the backyard?
Yeah, strong
Oh.
in the backyard. Like Muslims typically hate dogs.
Really?
They're unclean.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. No idea.
I mean, I don't know if that's something that's fairly new or.
I mean, yeah, this was 300 years ago, so I don't know exactly when that proverb came about, but
Working dogs? Apparently. They're just like stray dogs.
No, I think I have to do the research on that. It's been a while since I looked it up, but
I did wonder about that dog thing too. It's like, I was with the dog, but I haven't seen really all that Muslim.
and it's possible too. A comparison between the dog and the king might not be a compliment to the king. I don't know. Better is a strong dog in the yard than a king in the capital.
Yeah.